menadžerska, naš, katastrofa, ali ja toliko sad na njih, utičem, stavljam svoju poziciju, ali me malo i nervira što tu radim, zato što, ne znam, mi se borim s njima, ne mijenja se stvar, razumiš, znaš, njihovi stavovi, ja tamo mislim nešto sam postigla.
Ona je još gore, možeš dve šače depresije. Ovo, to je neoliberalno potentno, jer je ona oženjena izgleda s nekim tipom ili je bila koji je imao
And now we start.
Yes. Okay.
Hello, everybody, and welcome here live. You are present in Depot. And I want to say also hello, everybody who follow us, watch us live through YouTube channel. My name is Zoe Gudovic, and tonight I really have a pleasure that say welcome to this amazing presentation of the book. When Radio Orange called me to announce tonight presentation of the book, I was so honored, because long time I know amazing women who sit here, and I'm really looking forward to meet tonight amazing author of the book, I Am Jugoslovenka, Jasmina Tumbas. And I must tell you that I am also Jugoslovenka. So in that case, it's the pleasure, it's big and bigger, and, and I know that it will be interesting, because tonight, of course that you know these amazing women, but I really need to tell you who sit here and who will speak tonight and present the book. We have a Marina Gržinic, professor, Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna. Natasa Mackuljak, PhD candidate, Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, and WIENWOCHE. Mirjana Mustra, student, Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna, and author of the book, I Am Jugoslovenka, Jasmina Tumbas, assistant professor, State University Buffalo, New York, USA. So really enjoy presentation of amazing book, and we are so happy we are in Depot, and please listen, follow, share Radio Orange program. Very soon I will start with my show Energia on the Radio Orange, but this will also be interesting, because I hope that this all of you here who will present the book will also be guests in Energia, but I know that Natasa was already. So people, follow us, listen, and now I give word to Sara from Depot, and thanks for this great hospitality.
Thank you so much, Zois. Thank you on the podium. Thanks for coming, for listening, for watching our live stream. My name is Sarah van Dordrecht. I'm the director of Depot, and I think I can announce we never started on time like today. So welcome to everybody who's here and who's listening. Everybody who's at Depot is invited to stay for a drink afterwards, and I'm looking forward to the presentation. Thank you so much.
Okay, so I will take over. My name is Marina Gržinic, and I was introduced. I will be a kind of a majordomo today for this very important book that we will have a possibility to listen as an introduction, and then with my colleagues, Natasa and with Mirjana, we would like to really open, I will say, a critical, in-depth dialogue, and to question many things, to cheer them, but also maybe to pose some critical questions. This is the idea of tonight, and we are hoping also for your questions or comments. We will open the floor for this, because this book deserves such I will say focus such a context. Why? Because as a book, I must say personally, is the first one that covers historically the feminist movement together with reflection of the LGBT queer movement in ex-Yugoslavia, and try to pose some theses and also try to give an overview what feminism in Yugoslavia meant, what can be for the future, and to us is actually to question now how this thesis relates, I will say, to the historical moment of ex-Yugoslavia that doesn't exist anymore as a state, and we know different periods of this history and also different failures of this history. So it's now to understand how and what the book is saying, what we have as in front of us, and to think what kind of future these two possible narratives or even three narratives actually are offering to us. I think it's an important point because in this present moment when we will discuss the book, we have the war in Ukraine, and this war didn't happen, but has a history also, and many brutalities that are going on there, but also political relations for some of us who are older resembles historically what was going on also in former Yugoslavia. And I think because of this, it's even more important that we have a chance to discuss. But if I go even more in details before giving the word to Jasmina Tumbas, I would like still briefly to introduce the speaker and also my colleagues. More, maybe 2 sentences, 3 sentences more, because it's an important context to understand the book and also to understand the work of Jasmina Tumbas. So it was said, she is now assistant professor of contemporary art history and performance studies, and also director of the graduate studies in the Department of Global Gender and Sexuality at studies at the University at Buffalo. This book is her major work that really now is presented all over. And this also it's a good point because opens many possibilities for discussion. On that side is my colleague, also a student, but moreover a colleague, Mirjana Mustra, from Belgrade, a multimedia artist, curator, and cultural worker. And maybe it's important for her work just to get a context. She was working with different exhibitions and festivals. One of them is Donau Festival in Krems, and it's actually currently studying at the Academy of Fine Arts in Vienna. And Natasa Mackuljak, it's coming also like Mirjana was born in former Yugoslavia, Natasa in Bosnia and Herzegovina, Mirjana in Belgrade. Natasa is a performer, multimedia artist, social worker, curator, and cultural producer. She is currently a PhD candidate in philosophy at the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna. What is important is that presently she is the executive director of a very important festival, some kind of a grassroots or of festival that is a transcultural festival for art and activism that is more known like WIENWOCHE. So this is quite a good context to be mentioned, because also what will be the discourse can come from this context. And maybe also an important point for Natasa, her activist roots lie in the organization Žene u Crnom in Serbia, and I think Žene u Crnom for many of us it's an important moment looking back to the history. Their activities are, I think, something of historical importance that gave us at that moment when they started to protest and to be present a possibility to think that maybe some future will come after the war that was going on in ex-Yugoslavia. So what we do today, the idea is we would like very much Jasmina to give us a short, but not too short, but still short overview of the book. And then we start with questions. And as I said, afterwards we will be also very honored and happy if you could also react, comment, or ask questions. So, Jasmina, the floor is yours.
No? Oh, okay. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. Thank you, Zoe, for coming and doing this amazing introduction, and I look forward to speaking with you more. I am honored to be here, and I want to thank the depot for having me, especially Sarah, for inviting me and for hosting the book talk, and then also Eva Bruckner, who helped me with all the logistics and helped me secure my accommodations and flights. And then huge thanks to Marina, who contacted me and said I had a historical brick or something. It was this amazing a moment, and said she would very much like for me to come to discuss this. And then I couldn't be more honored than have these two amazing women and feminists on my side here to discuss this book. And I think it lends itself very, very well to have a very critical discussions and a lot of back and forth, so I look forward to that. I also want to thank all of you for being here. I know there's a lot going on, and the room is very full, which is extremely exciting, and I'm very, very honored, and thanks to everyone online who's kind of chiming in. Perhaps it's important to just give you a tiny bit of background beyond my kind of academic work. I was born in Subotica, which is about 4 hours from here, I think. I was born to a Hungarian mother and a Serbian father, but my family left in the late 80s and when I was 7 years old. So I lived in Germany and I finished my German Abitur, also kann ich auch Deutsch sprechen, wenn man eine deutsche Frage stellen will. I understand everything in Serbian. I speak a very non-elegant Serbian, but I can speak it. And I also understand Hungarian, but I don't speak it very well. So if any of those are your preferences, you can also ask them those questions and we can translate for the audience if this is necessary. So I left after my German Abitur. We lived on Duldung first in Germany on toleration status, and then later on Aufenthaltsgenehmigung, and then at one point I got a German passport that made things a lot easier in the 2004. And then I went to the United States to pursue a BA, MA, PhD, and then I had a job offer. So that's why I ended up in the United States for 20 years. I never planned to live in the United States, but it's one of those immigrant stories where I was just giving more funding, and I just stayed with the opportunities that were given to me, and I'm really grateful for that. I begin with this short recap because I want to stress my own position from which this book is written as a scholar of art history and gender studies, but also as a child of the Yugoslav state who spent most of her life outside of the very country about which I ended up writing. Yugoslavia and the question of women's empowerment have been central protagonists in my life for a very long time. And I'm very honored, actually, that I had the chance to critically engage with this very question through the lens of art and visual culture. In that regard, I also want to take a moment and thank Manchester University Press and the editors of the series Rethinking Art's Histories, Amelia Jones and Marsha Miskimmin, for taking on this unusual and experimental project that I call, Feminist Performance Politics of Jugoslovenka. And also, I'm not selling the book. I don't have the rights to sell the book, but we have some flyers and at the front there, and there's currently a 40% discount on the book with the code Jugoslovenka 40. It's an expensive academic book, so I really recommend you use the discount code, and it will expire end of June unless I convince them to continue it. So you're welcome to take a flyer, and if you have questions, you can always ask me after. So today I will focus for just about 10, now maybe 13 minutes about my book. I have tons of slides, so I can stop, and then if there are, if it comes up during discussion, I might show some other images. But I'm going to try to actually show you make some of the arguments or talk some of the arguments or the points, and then also show you some of the visual material that I cover, and then we can go more into depth. In these 15 minutes, I hopefully will be able to convey some of the visual argument I make in my book, which explicates feminist motives, desires, and forms of resistance in the socialist Yugoslav context during its disintegration and up to today. As my book centers feminist methodologies in field of embodied and visual art and culture, this talk today will highlight some of the examples in my book and elucidate how and why I came to research the significance of Jugoslovenka and feminist performance politics during the socialist period, and why she, as a figure, might still be relevant today. As a historian of art and culture, my research was driven by the question of what we might learn from a visual history of women's emancipation and the feminist movement evident in art and culture during Yugoslav socialism. How does an explication of feminist performance politics provide an essential narrative about a nation that has since perished, but which remains the foundation for the work of feminist artists, theorists, and historians from the region? And what does a difficult story of socialist Yugoslavia and its disintegration in the 90s tell us about both the generative but also problematic parts of that political system, such as the persistence of gender-based violence and patriarchal values? Of course, this event today also tries to think through the violent history of Yugoslavia during the disintegration, especially palpable in the Srebrenica massacre and genocide. So because of that, today I want to begin my discussion with an image from 1993, showing, of course, the legendary Miss Sarajevo with the winner Inela Nogic and other contestants holding up a banner stating in bold capital letters, "Don't let them kill us." This plea for international help and support happened during the siege of Sarajevo, and the celebration took place in a cellar due to constant sniper attacks. Of course, now we hear a lot about sniper attacks in the Ukrainian war as well. With a bright smile and her arm reaching up to wave at the onlookers, Nogic's body beams behind this absurd and profound pleading for help. Help didn't come, and when it came much too late. In 1994, a year after she had directed Waiting for Godot in Sarajevo, Susan Sontag published an article in the Performing Arts Journal reflecting on her experience in Sarajevo and charging her readers to ask themselves why so little international attention was paid to such political carnage and injustice. She observed that Sarajevo residents didn't identify with nationalism, but instead held on to the transnational Yugoslav project that for them paralleled the democratic possibilities of a united Europe. We are part of Europe. We're the people of former Yugoslavia who stand for European values, secularism, religious tolerance, and multi-ethnicity. One of the most urgent questions included, how can the rest of Europe let this happen to us? Sontag was disgusted by the lack of international care for the fate of Sarajevo residents and linked that lack of interest to Islamophobia and racism. She noted, quote, "When I replied that Europe is and always has been as much a place of barbarism as a place of civilization, they didn't want to hear. Now, a few months later, no one would dispute such a statement," end quote. So this binary construction of civility versus barbarism, of course, has haunted the European continent for centuries, including Yugoslavia, where the more northern parts often espouse closeness to civilized European politics, while southern Yugoslav countries are deemed more barbaric. Despite this shifting parameters of this colonial and imperial logic due to different political moments, the strictures of gender usually play out negatively for women, be it in civilized or non-civilized, so-called non-civilized parts of the land. Leyla Shomun has pointed out that the onset of the war in itself in Sarajevo was gendered, as the first victims of the siege in April 1992 were 2 women, and who had demonstrated against the war. Shomun added, "Women living in bombarded cities end up being heroes of peace, while men are esteemed for battles they win." So ultimately, the Miss Sarajevo contestants would become most well known for their beauty. The brunette silver medal winner, you see here in the background on the right, recalled in an interview, "I was second runner-up. That was the happiest time in my life. There was a newspaper story about the pageant. On one page, we were carrying this big sign, 'Don't let them kill us.' On the other page of the newspaper, it showed 18 people were killed and 15 were injured. That was in comparison that was going on during the same day. We were trying to be beautiful, and during the exact time, people would be killed." She ended that thought with one word: amazing. While to outsiders it might have been sadder and more perverse than amazing, it was important for me and in my book to take seriously women's voices in the zone of survival, who rarely have the luxury to be cynical about the beauty they get to experience or embody. In this regard, Jasmina Zvanic's recent film is a stark reminder of why we must consider Jugoslovenka's position in the Yugoslav wars. Centered on the 1995 genocidal massacre of Bosnian men and boys in Srebrenica, the main protagonist of the story is, of course, Aida, an elementary school teacher who ends up working as a translator for the UN, for the UN forces stationed in her hometown during the war. While the film reveals the horrific realities of war and Aida's ultimately futile struggle to save her husband and sons from being murdered, she emerges as a fierce woman navigating the patriarchal sphere of the UN and the Serbian forces. As things become more and more dire, there is one moment, of course, that really struck me when Aida remembers an event during which ethnic Serbs and Bosnians were still side by side. A light-hearted and fun contest for East Bosnia's best hairstyle of 1991-1992. So women's beauty contest, as a cheerful and frivolous contest, became a marker of a time when the different ethnicities that made up Yugoslavia could be celebrated, and the diverse beauty of Yugoslavia and women could be celebrated together. Now, I start with this because of the theme of today's talk, but I actually do not discuss the film in my book because it came out after I had already written it. It was already in peer review. But the film, for me, when I saw it, really underlined reminded me also how important this political commitment is to highlighting and thinking through, problematizing, critically engaging with this legacy of anti-fascism and feminism coming out of the Yugoslav project, the very same system that also produced the gendered violence in the 1990s wars. And of course, it is also important that this year is the 30th anniversary of the siege of Sarajevo. And as we see the horrific events unfold in Ukraine, we have also seen an emergence of many of the survivors of the Yugoslav wars who share, their important and under-acknowledged stories. One must only think, of course, of the Bosnian Muslim women who were kidnapped by Serbian men and forced into militarized rape camps, such as the notorious Hotel Lina Vas in Bosnia and Herzegovina. One woman would later testify, quote, "They called us Turks. They told us, you are not going to give birth to Turks anymore, but Serbs," end quote. Genocide scholar and law professor Elhimana Memišević, who fled Visegrad as a young girl during the war. I had a chance to speak with her and also interview her. She was just recently giving a talk at Buffalo. She added, quote, "After the repeated rape, many of them were murdered, thrown into the Drina River, or burned alive," end quote. The hatred toward Turks was in reality, of course, a retaliation against these Yugoslav Muslim women, coded as other in the Serbian nationalist rhetoric of protecting European Christendom from what they considered a Muslim invasion. today Memišević is actively pushing against many of the perpetrators of the war who are now free and still espousing ethnic, religious, nationalist ideologies. So I set this context up because, for one, because it raises the issue of Srebrenica, but also because, for me, it raises the stakes for considering questions of gender when looking at this region. It also reminds us that the Yugoslav women's stories are varied and complicated, but for me, what connects them is the feminist legacy of transnational anti-fascist solidarity. So someone like Memišević is extremely invested in helping women from all the different areas. As such, the task of the book, was to see both the generative and deeply problematic aspect of Yugoslav socialism while also honoring the women who came out of the system and whose identities are deeply intertwined with the complex history of the feminist legacy of Yugoslavia during socialism, the wars, and up until now. So, and one of the things I've noticed just speaking with people who have read my book or, having coffee today, and this question of how to identify and to identify with this nation is very interesting, and it kind of has struck a lot of women, even Zoe, talking about like identifying as Jugoslovenka, and every single person I speak to has a different story attached to that identity and that identification. And so that is really what I wanted to start to develop in this book, to open up the discussion for people to discuss their backgrounds and their identities. So maybe in 5 more minutes I will kind of go over a little bit how I divided this long book. The publishers were telling me just stop at one point, so it's already much too long, but it's divided in 5 chapters. The introduction sets up sort of why Jugoslovenka and the argument. Then I first, in the chapter 1, I look at, more like the avant-garde. Oh, that is not the image. I have no idea what happened. This is a PC, so maybe something got a little messed up. I apologize. But here's sort of some images. I came across Goran Kamatic's fantastic photograph of all these women, many of who are protagonists in my long research since graduate school of performance art and conceptual art. Jasna Tijardović, Bojana Pejić, Biljana Tomić, Dunja Blažević. I mean, it's just a really amazing group. And then also starting to really think about the feminist organizing in the 70s in Belgrade and the ways in which Yugoslav feminism also differed from Western feminism. And then I was thinking about how feminists like Sanja Veković really envisioned a socialist system that was much more in line with the feminist foundation of the country. So in some way, this book really wants to honor that partisan background. And when I first started to write this book, I really wanted to tell this heroic story of Yugoslav socialism being like the most amazing example of gender equality and so on and so forth. But of course, the feminists in the country were quick to be very critical of the regime and the patriarchal foundations. And so that made it actually a much more interesting example. So for me, this book is also a cautioning tale in kind of romanticizing a particular story of a nation or the particular potentials of a nation. But I think that if we look at it critically, and for me, art is one way of really unlocking a lot of complicated issues and opening up the discussion, I think we have a much better chance of finding revolutionary potential in it. So this is one work that I really venerate because it poses the Yugoslav socialist as a feminist project and replacing, of course, the star of Yugoslavia. So here are just some of the examples of going through a visual argument of looking at artists who are engaged critically with the flag and gender. Katalin Ladik exposing the Yugoslav state as a lie. Zoran Popović painting his wife into the flag, into this kind of claustrophobic, but also like honoring the woman on March 8th. So really talking about the embeddedness of feminism within everyday culture. And this fantastic piece by Sanja Veković commenting on the dictator, Yugoslav kind of leaders, all in knowing gaze. Then, of course, I was extremely invested in showing the sex positivity of Yugoslav socialism compared to other places, especially compared to the perceptions of socialism. So this is where I'm just going to go a little bit through some of the images. And I just wanted to say one thing about this work, which was revelatory to me. And again, stop me anytime. So this was a piece that was published in a special issue of My 75, which was an alternative, like self-published samizdat publication that was edited by Vlasta Delamar, F for female. And I saw this piece by Rada Čupić, and I thought, this is about the claustrophobic feeling of a woman in the home. That was my first kind of reading. And then I looked close, I was like, oh yeah, this is a critique of socialism because there's the star. And then I looked close and I was like, oh wait, there's a flag on there, right? So if you look, it's hard to see with this lighting, but it's like, you know, the blue line on the bottom, I thought it was a fence. And so then I contact the artist, and my reading was completely wrong, because she said that this was a house just outside of Novi Sad that was in a village which had helped anti-fascist fighters. So this was a house that had a widow with children who was helping like anti-fascist fighters escape and protect them. So there I saw this incredible anti-fascist legacy in work that we haven't really written about or haven't really been unlocked. And it was another example of how complicated it is to read feminism from within the context and apart. And then, of course, I also have more of these more famous examples, which then I link to more popular culture situations. And I'm happy to talk about this comparison if anybody wants me to later. But, really thinking about Lepa Brena and the legacy of some of the greatest icons of Yugoslav culture, and I see people smiling because so many of us sort of grew up with Lepa Brena and Esma Recipova. But then, when I went to the academy and into the art context, I am from a working class background. I never went to a museum before I went to school. I didn't even know you could study art history until I went to college. And then I realized that Marina Abramović, however problematic she is a very interesting link in the global art scene about Yugoslavia. So, I can talk about all of this later. This is Esma Recipova wearing the flag. And then this is the queer chapter. Marina is a big part of that, and thank you for letting me interview you for hours on end. And all of you should see Marina's amazing documentary about the lesbian scene, which was extremely important. But here also Marina collaborating with the Borgesia and doing a very transgressive work that was, part of the 80s underground culture, really resisting the patriarchal state and the more like heteronormative environment and really pushing up against it. And then I kind of link it to contemporary iterations of embracing lesbian sexuality and transgressive sexuality, because Helena Janicic, when I interviewed her, told me that the first time she read about lesbian sex or lesbian love was through Start magazine, which was a magazine during Yugoslav times. So these are very sort of fun things that I explored, and also doing work in the archives, looking at the visual culture of sexual liberation and queer sexuality in Vix magazine. Again, edited by Marina here. Yeah, the videos aren't working. And then I link it really to more contemporary examples like Merlenka, who for me becomes a figure of transnational peace, and Gržinic's really interesting engagement with the toxicity of war, with male toxicity, a transgender sexuality, sex work in the Yugoslav context. And again, I'm happy to speak more about this work. And then I talk about the avant-garde group NSK and kind of how gender plays out in that group. Again, I'm happy to speak about it. This is the only work I know that actually engages with their idea of how to, the politicization of women. So I went to their entire archive of work to just look visually. That is really my key. I'm really a visual thinker. And then I end on this last generation with these amazing kinds of women. You are not in the book, but I hope in my next book. Well, you are in some way, right? So, and I end on this kind of legacy of what do we do with this Yugoslav project after it's disintegrating, during its disintegration. What are some of the most generative elements that feminists have taken? For example, Women in Black, thinking about transnationalism, as Marina also said in the beginning, still an extremely important feminist group. Then, the question of ethnic Roma within the Yugoslav project versus after Yugoslavia and how much worse things got. But, you know, and Salman really thinks about that, doing a lot of humanitarian projects and then bringing a lot of good things to her village and then owning the name Tito. That's her nickname because the village associates good times with when Tito was still reigning. So this is very interesting because she was born after the disintegration or during the disintegration. So what does this mean? That the idea of Yugoslavia and Jugoslovenka is still kind of relevant to a generation that wasn't even born under socialism. And then I look also at the diaspora, at how people like Tanja Ostojic really think about what it did to the Yugoslav woman and her identity. And of course, the crowning image of my book, Šelja Kamerić, shot in the middle of the war and what it really meant for women to go through that very difficult period. I'll stop right here before I go on and on. I have like 30 more slides, but thank you so much.
Yeah. So, fantastic. Yeah, so practically, just from this glimpse, really a glimpse that gives an idea about the archival power of this book. This was also my input because I said we were waiting for long to have somebody coming together and put many of these images that we have at home in different magazines and so on, but to give a line. So in this way, I thought the book is really giving this visuality, also if it's not the best quality, but just to have all these archives together, I found this start for a discussion, no? Because when you have this, then you can start to really make analysis. So one of, maybe if I start and then I give the word to my colleagues, I said, okay, when you had the first talk, very short at the academy through the Zoom, that we were very happy because was connected with the Mirjana Mustra exhibition about this idea of identity groups from ex-Yugoslavia, being in Vienna and having a chance to have to come out visually with artworks and also to say we are here, we are present, and so on. At that point, one of the most challenging theses that was pose in that short Zoom talk was actually how, in which way to connect, and you said you want to talk, how to connect, for example, turbo folk in that figure of Lepa Brena, and the part that you cover that is really important because you have all these histories put together, and this is, for example, the alternative or subcultural movement in Ljubljana. When you said everybody was listening to Lepa Brena, and I said we from the punk movement never listened to Lepa Brena. I must be honest, it was something so disgusting that in that relations to the music. And from this is coming actually a question not about this comparison, but on which points you actually stay, you stay in terms of, let's say, theoretically, critically, how these things come together, no? Mm-hmm. How you connect them through this idea, powerful idea, that was a feminism, feminist movement in ex-Yugoslavia, and that this movement, in a certain way, could also oppose, let's say, the brutalities of the Balkan War and, of course, Srebrenica genocide. And I think this will be one of the lines that I'm really interested, if you can share with us.
Yeah, I can certainly try. And I very well remember your reaction to, I mean, yeah, what I meant with everybody was listening to Lepa Brena, I meant with it, she was a big icon in popular culture, and sure, you weren't listening and you're, in the subculture, fine, but for me, actually, it was more about her circulating in popular media. And when I was thinking about Yugoslav feminism and also what influenced me as a person growing up in the 1980s, I really wanted to not just write a book that privilege is avant-garde and more elite kind of entry points into the question of feminism, but I also wanted to honor more mainstream ideas about empowerment, emancipation, and that also has to do with honoring more like working class background, which is what I'm coming from, and also like what I was like raised with. So for me, Esma Recapova and Lepa Brena were like something in my household that really influenced how I felt about myself. And when I speak to other women from the region, they have very similar reactions. So that's the subjective entry point, right? I listened a lot less to Lepa Brena than Esma Recapova, but that's besides the point. I think that in performance studies, we have a chance also to expand the repertoire of what is included and to find potentials for resistance and beauty and even sort of political emancipatory potentials in very complicated examples. And I think that one of the things that attracted me to Lepa Brena was exactly that complication, because I think Yugoslavia as a nation itself is extremely complicated. When I first wanted to write this book, all I cared about, and I've said this to others, I wanted to, say this like really positive story, and then, the more you read, the more complicated everything gets, and Lepa Brena is just like that for me. So she doesn't match the avant-garde intervention, but she is very important for some queer strands of culture. Drag, for example, and I think she remains iconic in that regard, even to this day. Now, the other thing that's really important is that the mobilization of this music within a kind of militarized, genocidal rhetoric. So I think I take your point. She is really related to Turbo folk, but she was actually kind of prior to that. Of course, it is really, like some people say it's like, I think it was you said it was like the ugly grandchild of Lepa Brena or something, Turbo folk. But it depends on who you ask. Of course, some people are deeply disgusted, right? But for me, Jugoslovenka as a term, she sang the song, and it's based on the song in which she talks about multi-ethnicity, the possibilities of peace. But she is, of course, like reproducing like the male gaze and all of these Orientalist tropes. And I write about this in the book and how like problematic it is. And in some ways, she's also a really good figure through which we can start to understand some of the racism that was happening within the Yugoslav project itself, some of the sexism that was big part of the Yugoslav project. So she's really good for those things. And I also like how she raises a lot of like people have strong feelings, about her. So it was a little bit of a risk, but I think I couldn't write a book about Yugoslav women without mentioning her, especially because of what happened in the 1990s. Mm-hmm. I hope that.
Yeah, no, super. It's just for also to make this relation, because when my stance, not my private stance, but theoretically talking about feminism, I must say I show a certain fidelity, for example, to Jarana Papić, mm-hmm. Who exposed very clearly that turbo folk actually is connected with what she named the whole genocide
right.
and what was going on in Serbia specifically when she's doing the analysis, the text that was published, it was in the beginning of 2000. She said very clearly that we can connect these turbo elements of the music with a specific movement that she calls turbo fascism. And she said, as feminists, we cannot be afraid of such very powerful but also very problematic terms that goes back to classical or historical fascism, and bring this if we see elements in our analysis. So in this moment, my question was really on which elements this analysis of feminism stands. But maybe we go on and then we will come back with, please, Natasha.
So you took away my question as well, but I would like also just to go back and at the beginning of the evening and welcome you, say welcome, Jasmina, to Vienna, because of also a double welcome from us who are coming, who are here as gastarbeiters, but feminist gastarbeiters, so migrants Jugoslovenka's position here in Vienna. And we are very honored to have you here with us, and I would like immediately to thank you, but also Marina mentioned previously how you're for writing all this complex and detailed publication, and that you put the whole history of the feminist legacy from the 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s to 2000. This is really unique now. And what you also said, Marina, at the beginning, I also wanted to put attention on it, how important it is to also have this in a written form and have in an archive, to be an archive in the future, because we know that throughout the wars in Yugoslavia, because Yugoslavia was a terrain of many wars, and throughout the wars there was always this kind of erasure of the history, but especially erasure of the female history, and because the history was always written anew, but mostly from the male positions. So this was for me the first, idea, how great it is to have such a book in the hand, and that we, now these generations, could have it and will be strong enough in our feminist struggle to keep it for more future generations. And I also would like to say that I'm really honored tonight because you just mentioned also through the history of the feminist legacy. You mentioned Marina, Gržinic. I want to say that I am very honored sitting with you, Marina, tonight, and also that having you, Marina. Of course, there is this whole history of you, because you was one of the starting points of the queer and gender and sexual liberation movement, that we know everybody that started from Ljubljana and started from one of you was one of the main protagonists. But I want to also to say that having you here in Vienna as a professor, that for us feminist position has a great value. Who are coming from ex-Yugoslavia, because of this incredible knowledge and art in contemporary theories, but also somebody who always acts in solidarity and support. This is, I wanted to say, and also I wanted to say, we got to know that Zoe are coming, we didn't know in time. Zoe will come, and I would like really to mention Zoe, because she's part of this history that you're writing in the book, and she is one of the protagonists of anti-war and feminist, queer and lesbian, trans women movement in the 90s in Belgrade, but coming from the field of the theater. And tonight you are with us as a Zoe, but sometimes you come as a Z, so maybe we will, as a trans person, so maybe we will hear you in some other moment in this position. This is what I really felt important to say, because I feel already kind of making such an introduction, also reading the book somehow. I also, for me was the same, the question that you, Marina, posed, that you, because you in your book discuss really the most of the feminist positions from throughout the history in the performance art, and but different feminists in female positions who are, so to say, some of them, because I wanted also to ask the same question about Lepa Brena, and how do you see and how you can draw the trajectory between some of these positions and tell your motivation of naming them Jugoslovenkas, and like to a little bit to say the difference and connections of those positions, but especially in relation to the position of those feminist positions who were self-determinized as feminists and those who were not, because we have also this case, no, that they were, like for example, Vlasta Delimar, a totally clear feminist works that she had, but she never determinized herself as a feminist, right? And then
she actually despised to be
exactly,
called
yes.
a feminist.
Yes, and so all these legacies, at the end, you manage to put together under the same frame of the name of Jugoslovenka. So this would be like my, maybe to say also where do you see empowering and emancipatory moments in such different positions.
I mean, yeah, that was the big, big task, and that was probably what took me the longest to work through. So I had the choice, will I include self-declared feminists? Do I go by people who are approved as feminists or whatnot in the canon? Or do I write a new history or a new kind of more experimental approach to what is possible in the potentiality of emancipatory potential, feminist potential? And I chose the second option because I found it more interesting and more relevant because the more research I did on feminists who were doing work, the more I realized that there's also phases in which they identified as feminists, then they identified as dissidents, then they identified as queer, then they were anti-feminist. Like these things change over time. And I think that's also a very interesting research project, and there have been people who have written about that. I mean, Sofia Loran's book, The Feminist Challenge to Yugoslav Socialism, is a fantastic book. I mean, I owe so much to her. So definitely check out her book. She's not as invested in visual material, but I mean, that's not irrelevant. She does a much more kind of precise, like, this is the feminist movement, etc. But I wanted to do something a little bit different, and of course it was also a big risk to go from like the 60s or 70s to now and to put these very controversial figures together. And I say this, I constantly explain also in my book how you can look at it from this angle, why we should consider it. So it's not about the coherence of a movement for me. I don't pretend like there is a coherence. The name itself, Jugoslovenka, I want people to go away with this book and say, like, she's so many different things. But what I've learned is that in Yugoslavia, there was a lot of emancipation, there was a lot of resistance, and a lot of queer and feminist material. And these women complicated socialism, and they've been overlooked in the history. And it's not just Marina Abramovic, who is also despises feminism or has despises Yugoslavia. I mean, those are two ways how people are like, how can you call her Jugoslovenka when she like just talks so terribly about the country? But for me, always is the answer, how can I not include the most famous woman from Yugoslavia in performance art who deals with endurance of the body? She's interested in body politics. And so I try to actually give different readings of her work at times, which is always a risk. But for me, it was interesting. I really wanted to think through the new ways of looking at this history. And there's always going to be huge complications, and there's no way you can account for them. This is not, again, about coherence. It is about a starting point to make a case that we must look, and that we should look. We must not, no one has to do anything. But that there's a lot to be unfolded. And so when you say, Zoe would be in it, all I could think about in my 90s chapter and onward is like, who else I want to include. And one of the things I really love about this book, and I was telling Mirjana this earlier, is that it's starting to connect me with other people from the region who have been trying to collaborate, who've been trying to find other feminists who are like, I never say it, but I love Lepa Brena, but I'm also super leftist, and like, how do you reconcile that, And I wanted to, and I think that's a very queer approach, like, I am from the queer scene, like I come at it from a queer angle, like you can like be engaged with complicated matter, think about beauty and still be a feminist, think about you know, some of the more problematic elements of society, but like rethink it in a new way and find potentials for like more like positive approaches. That was also kind of what I wanted to do, because there's so much negativity associated with socialism and the stories of 20th century socialism. And for me, I mean, just looking at Borgesia and all of these things that were happening, I wanted to have a space where I can talk about the gayness, the super lesbian activism that nobody talks about, and connected to some of the other emancipatory work, and not say, okay, well, Lipa Brenna is not leftist, you know, so she doesn't fit, or she's not avant-garde or whatever. That wasn't really my aim. My aim was finding what it is, this like femme power, this Yugoslav like emancipatory potential. So that's how I put them under the umbrella. And now, the thing is that there's always more, and I love that. You know, people are like, well, what about, you know, Eurovision? And like, you know, so I love that people are starting to actually send me new examples. They're like, I think she would be in your book too. I'm like, I would have loved it, you know. But the publishers were like, we're done. It's, you know, you can't go any further. So I think it's just opening it up. And the contradictions are actually, I'm hoping that they generate more work, more research, more analysis. That's kind of the point for me. But yeah.
Maybe before giving word to Mirjana, it's very interesting for us because that we can talk in Austria about these things. That I think is quite an important thing in ex-Yugoslavia. Let's say it will be a standard, something easy. But it's good to talk about these things. I always have such a feeling outside, because this ex-Yugoslavia, also in Austria, that is so big vicinity, it's a very missed territory. Practically nobody, besides those who declare themselves to be Yugoslav, has no clue what's about, and mostly said, don't talk me, because they don't understand who is from where, and so on. So in this way, I think it's really challenging, and also this possibility of discussion, because it's streamed, to maybe clarify. Because one thing that also it's a key, I will say, while the beauty of the things that are exposed, and they are to be also the sexuality, the power of the body. On the other side, for me, always is a question when I think of the Srebrenica genocide, that for me is kind of a core of everything what happened in ex-Yugoslavia, and that also put under question all these progressives, because where we were together, or how this could happen, no? In this phraseology that we see today, when somebody from Ukraine is saying, how this is possible, how this can happen, but also that it's not only this moment, it's the brutalities that another scholar, Sasha Kesic, he published a book from Belgrade, a wonderful scholar that actually made specifically the research of the Pride Parade that was connected really with the emancipatory potential. Still, because ex-Yugoslavia is really a phobic. In Slovenia, even we had to go back to Pride Parade because the situation changed radically. And violence that happened in 2000, the people, the positions, the LGBT community beaten, the blood that was pouring out, so that violence connected precisely with what you also have as a part of the book, in certain way, all the time it's coming back, no? You ask, okay, the beauty and the sex and so on, and the power, but what you do with what we call the other side.
Oh yeah, definitely.
The other side of all this that has to be put.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I learned is that actually when I was, reading Batinic's book on partisans, I read a lot about the sexism that was part of the socialist project. So, and the patriarchal values, Tito's remarks about domestic violence. I mean, like, so that is actually something that my book that also tries to unfold is that patriarchal basis. And for me, the 5th chapter is trying to exactly argue and say, yes, patriarchy really went like berserk, like unleashed, it just like, and all these women in black, for example, Lepa Mladenovic and so on and so forth, Lepa Mladenovic talking about having to go back into the closet in the 90s because like you couldn't really like be gay and also try to help rape victims, how like it started to become very problematic. So I couldn't agree with you more that actually that rise, for me, it's not that it came out of nowhere. I think when you look at the feminist resistance, despite, and because like still the body positivity, body empowerment, and the eroticized leader and so on and so forth, but like the sexism was pretty intense. So I think the story is not one, like I said, of like Yugoslavia was this great place and then, oops, how did this happen? I think that I do not pretend to have the answer. I would never, assume that kind of authority. But what I try to do is signal that there was already a lot of problematic patriarchal elements and militarization within the project itself. And then instead of really talking about only the violence, I kind of privileged women's resistance to the war, women's solidarity with other women, to also really honor their work. So for me, I think in Europe, it has really been largely overlooked how much like feminists struggled in the region and how much they helped rape victims and victims, also people in the rural areas, ethnic Roma, and how organized they are. Whereas like the region is often just, they're the Balkans, they're warring, it's just a logical conclusion. But when you look at the feminist movement, you see that there's an extreme, loyalty to transnationalism and multi-ethnic kind of solidarity. So, I don't know.
So Mirjana, before we open to the public,
so I had so many questions and discussion went like this, so I'm gonna try now maybe to like comment first on this Lepa Brena. Why Lepa Brena? Well, I was born 78, so when I was 4 or 5 or 6, I listened to Lepa Brena, and I lived in a village, so like we did not have any other like let's call images of women that were like there and strong and dancing and flaunting legs, and the men were small and behind, and this was always like this image of this woman, like shiny, and so it made an impression for me, and I don't know, maybe I'm still influenced, I'm blonde, I like pink, I don't know, and but this was also interesting, well. So that was for me, in a way, empowerment, not Brena itself. I mean, I could not reflect that at that moment, but like what she provided to me. And also in your book, then you have this director of the theater play that she said the same thing, but like for the movie. Yes. Mm-hmm. Then she said the same thing, but only for the movie that I did not watch anymore, because then I went to some other music styles.
Heidi das Volno?
Heidi das Volno, yeah, I did not really watch this. But when I was, like, the book is amazing because for me it's also, I learned so much. It's like, wow, when they say the archives, it's like really amazing. And also the book is present in Academy of Fine Arts. I requested it, so you can
Thank you.
rent it. It's there. But also it's very important for me was that you also argue that there is this Jugoslovenka that exists now in diasporic, you said at one moment, and for me this is something really like present, because I also have a problem of this identity and what, and And this kind of anti-fascist feminist legacy that we actually here have, the women, and I have feeling always Yugoslavia exists here, but not in Serbia, you know. So from that, from that point of view, also the book is for me very important because now we also have some kind of theoretical frame to put like our also artistic practice, but also existence. And I wanted to ask you about when you wrote like in this 1978 Drugca conference, and the problem that existed between Western feminists and Yugoslav feminists, and how there was this misunderstanding and so on. And if you would comment maybe on this, how it's like now, if you would, because for me this was also when I came here 2003, I had a complete shock, you know. I did not understand them, they did not understand me either. So
What was the shock about?
well, you know, I come from, like, you know, if I'm in a bar and somebody wants to talk to me, first of all, he needs to, you know, come and ask me politely if I want something to drink, you know. Or if somebody's asking me out, they need to, you know, they come, they pick you up, they take care of you, you know. Well, man, here they come with the full glass and they expect, you know, the ones in Serbia, you know, where I grew up, they were like kind of grateful if I talk to them, you know. They buy a drink, but you don't have to talk to them. But this one here, they come with a full drink and expect, like, and if I turn around, he's like, come on, come on, you know, like, you don't talk to me. And, so I had a conversation with the women here, said, man, you know, I don't understand this. And they told me, yeah, but if he buys me a drink, he buys my time. And this is something that I said, yeah, but if, you know, it's not about buying my, you know, myself on time, you know. It's about showing respect when approaching me, you know, having something more than just, hey, you are a woman, you have to talk to me because I want to talk to you. You know, it does not work like this in anywhere in Yugoslavia that I know of.
Maybe you know another Yugoslavia.
Yeah, maybe, but not really. I mean, you know, maybe later they...
And maybe the point also, because we also talked about you, because you was mentioning about femme positions in the Drugca, maybe this is also something to rely also.
Yeah,
Here, in, you know, nail polishing and...
Yeah, that's why I really love this piece, you know. I had it earlier, now it's in the... Wait, sorry to go so far back. But yeah, you know, the red fingernail. I have to credit, you know, Chiara Bonfiglioli, who actually did this deep research on the conference you're discussing. All I did was actually take one of the things that she observed through her really rigorous work. So you should check out her master's thesis, which really deals with the entire conference, in which there was this conflict around, for example, fingernails, that the Belgrade feminists were having red fingernails, they had nice coats, they were having lipstick, and then the people from, let's say, from the UK were like, why are you dressing like this? You know, they were dressing more in like neutral, more like male clothes. And so what I found really fascinating there is that these tension revealed also different approaches to beauty and idea of beauty and empowerment, but they also unfolded some like homophobic ideas within the Yugoslav like feminist branch of like calling, you know, the women who were having red fingernails dykes or dykish and ugly, right? Versus like the British thinking that the Yugoslav feminists aren't very smart because, you know, they have to like dress for men and whatnot. And so unfolding these kind of tensions, again, without actually judgment on what is the right way, like as far as I'm concerned, you should approach it however you want, you know, your bar culture around how men treat you or whatever. I think the point is to not say this is what feminism is or this is how you engage. The point is of like analyzing what transpired. So I do that over and over again, not to say that one thing is the right thing or one thing is the wrong thing, but to say what kind of complexities emerged in this time and how can we find them through such a simple thing as fingernails. You know, what do we learn about feminism through conflicts around fingernails, conflicts around, what do you call what you were just describing, courting or whatever.
I don't know.
So,
Don't go up.
and I know that I haven't, you know, I know one friend who is also a feminist who was like, why aren't men catcalling me? In this city, people are so repressed. I'm used to being catcalled. And then, of course, I would be like, why are people catcalled? You know, it's just like, it's so interesting culturally what we're given and what we consider as dignity versus what is not dignity. That's why I also included Miss Sarajevo contests and beauty contests, which are, you know, habitually like, oh, these are just like women about like, you know, looking beautiful, but there's a lot more there, and this Yugoslav story and its relationship to that is really important, I think. So,
Also,
yeah.
these images that you have of the women during the war in Sarajevo and why they were like
sorry.
in the midst of this, you know, not having electricity or anything, they were really like taking care of themselves.
Yes.
So it's not like, doesn't matter if they wear this or that, but like more of this kind of importance on fashion and style.
Yes, yes, including, you know, this is what I started to look at. Yeah, I started to analyze like photos in journalism. So here you have manicured fingernails, and then I would read what people said about it, them wanting to have sex, you know, and we're like, yeah, we love sex and war, but actually then when you read about the stories of the women, they were widows. They had nothing to do with attracting new sexual partners. It had everything to do with their own sense of just feeling together during this like really hard time. So it was really something I was interested in unfolding, and first of all also just kind of giving some attention to these women. And now that this Ukrainian crisis happened, you see this emphasis on photography from the region and snipers and these kinds of questions, and even beauty contests and beauty queens posing with guns. And I mean, it's so interesting to me, and it's only like kind of the beginning for me, trying to comprehend some of this.
What is also, if I may, because when we are with this picture and then we have the you know, cover with Sheila, and then we talked also about this turbo folk, in a way it's like the same image, this sexy woman with the guns, and in turbo folk imaginary they're constantly these women who are like, so that's also this kind of, but completely different,
Yes.
how to say, background.
Political like potential in an extremely like, but that's why they are not there, because for me it's, I didn't read, like I was looking for more.
No, it was just like coming
positive,
now.
yeah.
But and one more thing, please, shortly. What I also think that you really argued very well in your book is like how the women like also artistic practice, even when not was like explicitly feminist or called like that, or even activist, you know, but like always argue or come to the anti-war and peace, and this you have it like through the whole book. It's going like you know, thread. You know, I'm very textile, yeah. So was this like your idea from the beginning, or it kind of went through your research? Because for me at the end this was kind of
what connected it all. Yeah, it came through analysis. It was, you know, like I said, I came actually to the book with some different ideas, and I came through, I mean, through writing really, and analysis, and then finding commonalities, like why are they connected, you know, and that's kind of how I write the story. But of course, someone else might have taken a very different route. So for me, it was really looking for things, you know, I am like analyzing for specific things, and one of them was this, like looking at some of these more generative elements of Yugoslav socialism. I could have written a book about only the patriarchal elements, would have been a very different book, right? So for me, I'm just more inclined to want to have positive potentials, or, you know, some forms of giving also the art history in this rethinking arts histories, like examples of resistance in a different context than just like the United States or Germany, and look at it, how complicated it is in Yugoslavia and after. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, so now it's a time to open for questions or comments from your side. Yes, please.
Yeah, I'd like to break the ice. I can talk loudly.
No, we need for the...
Hi. Thanks. I have a question that's more related to, I guess, how you felt writing the book from a standpoint of someone that is not living in Yugoslavia and is not really experiencing those things, but still has a connection to it. And I wanted you to elaborate on how do you think that actually helped you or restrained you in your writing? Because yeah, no, I'm going to end it there. I just want to hear about that.
I'd love to know because that's a really good question. So I had to really think about, like, am I entitled to do this? Like, why am I the person writing this? And one of the reasons I wrote it is because I don't have a home country, so I have never lived anywhere since I was 7 years old where I'm a citizen. So for me, this Yugoslav background has been something that has shaped how I think about the world, how I interact, how I choose my research. Because I was lucky enough to go to a graduate program at Duke University with Christine Stiles, who encouraged me to do research on former Yugoslavia. Actually, that was the first time ever in my academic life since any schooling where I had space to explore or to go back for the very first time, because I felt, and my family, we really felt like hostages to not being able to go back. And this was for political reasons, because of my father's deserting the army. So for me, it was a chance to understand better how I was brought up by my parents, and especially by my mom and my grandma, who were both fierce feminists, and my grandma illiterate, never even went to school, and my mom never really going past high school, but avid reader. I mean, she was an avid reader, my grandma wasn't, but she was an independent worker. So how do I reconcile this background with my immigration experience in Germany, where I didn't belong? And if you talk to anyone really from former Yugoslavia who grew up there in the 90s, it was not an easy time. You kind of were encouraged to not talk about the background, not discuss it, not discuss your personal relationship to it. And this book gave me an opportunity to combine both a personal narrative with scholarly work and expand it to include more cultural histories and cultural analysis. So am I the ideal person to write this book? No way. Who knows who could write this book? But I just did it anyway because I wanted to understand better what Marina Abramović has to do with Sanja Iveković, has to do with Marina, has to do with Lepa Brena, and why it is all such why are these such formative elements for me as a person who doesn't have a home anywhere. I don't belong anywhere. And I don't belong in Yugoslavia either, but I belong within my Jugoslovenka kind of identity. But the other thing I did want to caution against, and I do it a few times in the book, is to really also kind of resist the nationalism of that, to think about the diversity of Jugoslovenkas, but also problematize kind of the idea of the nation itself. But the word Jugoslovenka allows me to put the umbrella across these what are now different nations. Not to celebrate Yugoslavia just as this thing, as this nation I belong to, but actually the feminist elements is where I feel like I belong to, and that's why it's Jugoslovenka for me.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Another one, if I may, because I already have the mic very quickly. I think it's really, for me, it was really disturbing realizing that I don't know anything about this as someone who is from the region. I know so much about Western feminism, and I've never heard any of these things. I'm really embarrassed, to be honest. Really,
Don't be embarrassed.
No, I mean, it's kind of, it's a shame, but it leads me to think, okay, why is it? Yeah, but you have to think about why is it like that, right? What's the what's the media trying to kind of feed me and what I'm not actually seeing. Anyways, I just wanted to ask you another thing real quick. What was why you were able to kind of take a step back and kind of distance yourself from, and look at Lepa Brena as well as like some more avant-garde things, is exactly for that reason. A lot of people from the region either feel there's one right way to be a feminist, and so if I do listen to Lepa Brena, that's kind of like the trash part, right? And I think that's kind of really a narrow way of thinking about feminism. You know, I think it can be both ways. Mm-hmm. The reason why Marina even maybe doesn't want to identify herself as a feminist is exactly for that reason, because it has so many different definitions and it just doesn't fit, it doesn't fit her. So do you think that kind of
helped you? Marina Abramovic?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is that maybe, sorry.
Sorry, there's many Marinas.
I think if I can make a comment regarding Marina Abramovic, I think it's actually much more a prosaic reason. It's actually the question of the period when she left ex-Yugoslavia and in order to enter the market in capitalism, it was really important not to emphasize this, because now she actually make a big profit of ex-Yugoslavia. So we have to be very careful about how it's really about money, and it's about art market before everything else. And it's, of course, in one moment it was very suitable because to come back, and where was her big comeback? When she, in Venice Biennale, literally was cleaning, or what was, she was washing some bones. Yes. Yeah, that was really, again, the way how practically making some universal story of pure genocide and making a big saga, and that was the moment where you could say, yes, I'm coming back and I will be and connect, because before she will never use it, he was using the Slavic way of writing her name as an O. And this was, I think we have to be a little bit careful.
Yeah, thank you very much for the clarification. Yeah. Yes. But my question was just, so do you think that this separation of people who feel like they are and aren't feminists through the research that you did, do you think that's kind of widening the kind of pushing us further away from actually like being unified in the kind of a fight for feminist values? Or do you not see it like that? Do you
I'm not sure I understand your question. Are you asking me if I think the divisions that exist are pushing us away?
Yeah, within the feminist movement itself. So people that are in your book are both like, like your examples that you have in your book. Do you think they are contradictory? Like when it comes
They're definitely contradictory all the time, and there are different forms of doing it. But I think it's also really important to honor different approaches. I think it's fine to reject Lepa Brena as a feminist. I have no problem with that. The problem lies not for me whether or not we all have to agree, we all have to, because each feminist movement, if it is coherent, has very particular political priorities, and thank God for that. They have to, these women are focused on certain things. So Stasha Milosevic would never approve of Lepa Brena, and actually has very much this turbo folk narrative and the militarization. My task was to let them coexist in this book. I don't want to speculate whether or not they're more divisive, because the work feminists do often isn't about cohering a feminist movement. They have suffering women they're helping, they're fighting policy change or whatever, very specific political goals. So for me, this book kind of puts them together, or different, but not even the people who are doing policy changes. This is just really visual analysis and visual art, is trying to have them coexist. But in terms of coherence, I'm not sure if that could ever work or should work, really. So thank you.
Thank you for this interesting topic. I think at the beginning, when you mentioned the concept of, I would call it civilizational difference, you were talking about Europe and expanding European Union. this concept is the problem of the European Union,
yes.
and it reveals the whole European project as intrinsically racist.
Yes.
Because it creates always, this is why it is not possible from the European perspective to open discussion on Yugoslav feminism, because it reproduces this pattern which erases necessarily any history of feminism and liberation of women before the Europe arrives at the scene. So it has to have, start from scratch. This is closely connected to the fact that Yugoslav feminism 1990 falls apart, and you have liberal feminists, you have nationalist feminists. So this is the end of the project, and you have the feminists that completely identify with the idea of westernization, Europeization, in terms of the liberation of women is intrinsically Western. If it is, if there is no, then it is barbaric. So it is in terms of understanding the Balkans and the former Yugoslavia in terms of some sort of endemic patriarchy, etc. This is one thing. Another thing which I think is very important to, you mentioned Start magazine, Start as a Yugoslav project. In fact, I worked also for the Start. It is in fact a Yugoslav copy of Playboy.
Yeah.
And there is a very much of sexism imported already at the end of the 60s in the soft porn. When you see this Sheila Kameric, it reminds me of soft porns from the 70s. It is about, and we come, I agree completely with Marina. I was disgusted by Lepa Brena, but Lepa Brena is a product of Yugoslav cultural industry, of the fact of market socialism. So she was among these products. It was perfect product. So I'm coming, back. Yes, okay. This is the question.
What's the question?
Please comment.
So I agree with you. Start magazine, I mean, that's something I also write about, the women, the feminists who work there and their problems with the sexism, but also how it was a place where sexuality had, where lesbian sexuality was discussed, where feminist literature was published. So it's, it's none of it is one particular story of saying, okay, well, this was a purely feminist project, purely coming out of the partisan Yugoslav context. The issue for me was more actually unfolding feminist content despite all the sexism. So of course, Lepa Brena is a product, and people have written about this as great length, that she is, also replaced kind of Tito in the 80s as a symbol, etc. For me, I don't account for all that. I agree with you. I don't even comment on it. My focus was something very specific about reading emancipatory potential in it. You don't have to, you don't have to agree with it. Like, it's just an argument I'm making, but it does not mean that what you're saying, it's not mutually exclusive. I think those things can coexist at the same time, just like Beyonce can be said to be a horrible, like, capitalist, but at the same time empower generations of young women, right? So, and women of color, no less, and having, this platform. So how do we reconcile, these competing and contradictory realities in our analysis? And I don't reconcile them. I just unlock some of the one element. So I appreciate definitely your intervention, and I don't disagree.
Thank you. My question has got to do with today more, I think. One of your chapters was the last generation of Jugoslovenkas. I'm very interested in when this label will stop being attractive, maybe, in an attempt to localize myself or label myself without labeling myself. I used to call myself Jugoslavinerin, which is play on words with
Yeah.
Yugoslavia and Slavina, and people like that. I also like it. Sometimes I do think it's kind of self-balkanizing a bit, but never mind. My question is there a difference from your perspective or your research or your expertise in this label of Jugoslovenka today in the post-Yugoslav sphere and outside in the diaspora? Is it still an identity? Is es ein Identitätsangebot?
Das Buch?
No, the label itself, I mean. Is it as relevant in the post-Yugoslav sphere as it is in the diaspora?
So you mean in the region itself versus in the diaspora? That's a really interesting question. I think that that remains to be seen. I think that in the diaspora, I have received a lot more messages from women in the diaspora who say, especially young women who were born, let's say 1993, 1995, who say, oh, this is the first time I understand myself, you know, and they were born to Yugoslav parents who left and lived in Australia or lived in Canada or whatever, and they, you know, had some of this cultural stuff. They left, you know, in the 90s, and these women were born like already, you know, in 1993 or 1995, but clearly in the household had this Yugoslav background. So I think that because I myself am in the diaspora, it probably mirrors more diasporic identity, and I wouldn't presume to speak about the local. I do know that there are, of course, feminists within the countries that feel like they are in the diaspora within their own new nations. They don't identify as Croatians. They don't identify as Serbs, they identify as Yugoslav, but they don't have a choice. You know, this is kind of how it is now. So that is something I'm interested more for my next project, to really think about the regional identity. So this is a really great question. Thank you. I think.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to thank you for the title, because as I feel I am Jugoslovenka, it's a multi-ethical, Yugo-nostalgic way of thinking from the past, and I would never say that Lepa Brena is part of turbo folk, which is like two different spheres, because she connected like really multi-ethical views, or embodied all those views in her persona. And I think that, yeah, your title is very inspiring for especially women in the diaspora. And I just wanted to thank you on that.
Thank you.
Sorry, there was a question for, maybe? Yes, we have only time because of all this streaming, and also as it was for another question, I think, and then we will have to conclude.
Hello. Thank you, that was so fascinating. I really enjoyed all the inputs. I have two quite dense questions, so don't feel that you have to answer all of them. Okay. So first, it's already been noted that the book itself constitutes a vital archive. And you've mentioned in passing a few times your own work engaging with different archives. And I would love to hear a bit more about this aspect of your praxis. For example, what types of archives do you draw on? What was your methodology in reading or perhaps counter-reading existing collections? And any reflections you have on the current state of queer and feminist archiving practice in the former Yugoslavia? So that's the first one. Very small question. And this one kind of links to what was asked before. Obviously tonight you've spoken a lot about the production and circulation of ideas and discourses and visual codes and all that stuff. But a lot of what's been focused on is this kind of outward projection, or it felt like to me this outward projection. And I'm sure you complicate that a lot in your book. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the influence of, say, you know, the diaspora on these kind of inward projections and circulation of ideas and identities and so on, both historically and contemporarily. Yeah, how is this kind of flow and counterflows affecting what's going on then and now? In just 2 minutes.
Okay. Maybe if we can talk about the second question after, but also because I think we had one more question here in the front. So the archive, I mean, this is a really important question. I have done this archival work since 2007 when I first started to go into, contemporary museum archives. And then Vix magazine also I discovered already in 2008 or so in the Ljubljana Graphic Arts Museum. I don't remember the exact title right now. So the way I approach material is actually through really looking and visual analysis. That is huge, and taking notes and gathering and gathering things that have commonalities, that have differences. And then, of course, reading what material is there about them and how they tie in with other things. So the archival work spans from a long time ago, and I used a lot of the things I didn't have a chance to write about during my dissertation for this book, especially the queer content and the feminist content, because I wanted to combine them. The other thing is, of course, the incredible generosity of artists sharing their private archives with me, and that has been the #1 gift throughout the entire research period of the 12, 13, 14 years, is artists really opening up their homes to me and letting me look through their personal collections. So it's a combination of state archives and really a commitment to go every year that I could. And of course, as someone who comes from the United States, I was extremely lucky that I was at Duke University, where I could apply for funding in the summer and be, flying back. But then there's also certain limitations you have when you live really far away, and how you can engage with the material than if you're, on the ground. And so then, again, generosity, like Marina, who would send me files, or make sure that the museum would send me the files. So I think the state, I don't want to comment on all of it because there's so many different areas, but clearly there's certain countries that are deeply underfunded or under-resourced. But my hope is, of course, that this book will put more attention and put more research, and the more people request things, the more I think funding goes into these things. So that's a little bit, my hope. But the other thing we can discuss. We're going to run out of time, so yeah.
The last one, yeah.
Oh, I'm the last one. Well, thank you very much. I first of all want to thank you for the book. I'm going to read it, and I'm fascinated with the way you have put together a number of things, rethinking not only feminism but socialism and the context in which the feminism in Yugoslavia actually developed, and in a way which I find very proper. That generation who lived part of that and was part of the scene, but also putting it in transnational context. And I think that thinking about Yugoslavia in this transnational context is very productive, and your book seems to confirm that attitude. I actually wanted to follow up on this question of I am Jugoslovenka. I can overtake that statement, and that's also my own identity. But I wanted to ask you if you managed in the book, or you intend to do in your further work, to actually problematize how the term was differently used and applicable, and how it was possible to use it differently in different periods. Because, for example, in the 1990s, you have the efforts of Milosevic's regime to overtake the
right.
So that's the question, and I would be interested to hear.
Oh, this is thank you so much. I think that's a fantastic also way to kind of end the discussion. But I have one little part in chapter 5 in which I talk about how Yugoslavia as an idea, and actually also Yugoslav feminism, was mobilized by Milosevic and his wife, who identified as a daughter of a partisan and has all these mythological ideas about the birth. And so I do talk about the kind of hijacking of the idea of Jugoslovenka or whatever you want to call it. So I have started it, but I haven't gone into great depth yet. So for me, chapter 5 was really the beginning of much more research now. So I think that's something that I want to look at more closely in the future. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you.
Applause. Okay. Really, I want to say thanks, all of you. My name is Zoe Gudovic, for you who late. And tonight, but you mentioned the name, so I find that it's important to say in front of Radio Orange that we was broadcasting this live. So actually, we will also have a link that you can follow or spread information or share, and that people hear about I'm Jugoslovenka more. But also, I want to say thanks to Depot for all of this providing conditions and space for discussion and question. So people, like Sarah mentioned, now it's the time to mingle with each other and to ask a question Marina and Natasa and Jasmina and Mirjana Mustra. So Lepa Brena here, it's present, see blonde stuff.
I am Lokica.
But I must for all of you say that it's really great that we open so many different questions and diversity questions. And I think one of the important stuff coming from Yugoslavia, me personally, it's actually power that women that we mention or artistic names of the persons that Jasmina you collect are actually women who always resist to the war. And I think that we need to be proud in Yugoslavia about the anti-war movement and actually about feminists who never, support the war. So I think this is important. I know that we like to finish with some glorification of Lepa Brena, but I think the most important is our feminists who actually stand and fight and say, not in our names. So in that sense, I think this is the most important for the end of this live and present live and live through YouTube. So thanks a lot and really enjoy with asking the question and mingle and enjoy the night.
Thank you.